Hello everybody and welcome back to The Breakdown. I'm Tone and it's really great to have you here with me once again. Now, as you may guess, I've got my sharp hat on, and yes, today is time for another episode of That's a Little Sharp. Now, before I get into what I'm going to talk about today, I am going to touch on some things that might be viewed as offensive by some people, and if that could possibly be you, I would direct you to my If You're Offended video, which I did earlier this year. Check that one out. You'll understand how I look at what it looks like being offended, and how we can get around that in most cases. But granted, if you don't agree with what I'm talking about, there's no need to be offended. The only reason anyone would be offended by anything I say is if there's some truth to it and they don't want to accept it. So just be mindful of that. That's the disclaimer. But today I want to talk about when we have the power to do something, or we have the means to do something. Does that mean that we should? Just because we can, does that mean that we should? And we're gonna cover a few things to do with that. But some things that stand out first of all: the restrictions in Victoria, the hard closure on the border between Victoria and South Australia, which has since been retracted back to the 40-kilometre buffer zone, and the power grab that occurred there. Now, they've shown that they can, but we can ask the valid question, should they have done so? Many will say no, they shouldn't have. It was not something necessary. Now, if we have a little bit more of a look at this, and we understand that we've got some vaccines that are being trialled or talked about. Indeed, there are already vaccines that are in use that have some ethical questions about them. And of course, I'm talking about the vaccines that are made using stem cells. And I mean, it's a technology that we've had for quite a while, and it's being utilized. But again, just because we have a technology or an ability, that doesn't automatically equal that we should do it. That's my view. Now, stem cells, in many, like in the way that they do things, for some of these vaccines, come from aborted fetuses. Now, if you know me well, you'll know that I am dead against abortion under any circumstances. There's not any circumstance where I will view abortion as an acceptable outcome or an acceptable means to an end. No, it's unethical to every degree, under every circumstance. But we have the ability to do abortions, and we have the ability to use aborted fetuses to, I'm guessing a lot of people out there would just go, well, look, some people have decided they wanted to have an abortion, that's up to them, and then as they've done so, they then, well, let's not put the fetus to waste, so they're being used for some good for the people that are still alive. Now, to me, that's abhorrent. that view, that idea, disgusts me to the nth degree. Absolutely ridiculous that anyone would think that, oh well, never mind, it was already going to happen anyway, so we'll just do this. So we've got the power to do it. In my opinion, it certainly doesn't make it right. So if we are talking about vaccines, let's just have a think about, just because a vaccine will come out, does that make it right to? Is it right to mandate the vaccine? Now, I'm not anti-vax, and some of my comments on Facebook and other avenues in the past may have looked as though I am, but instead I'm not a anti-vaxxer. I can't say that a lot of vaccines, I can't say that they didn't do something good. Polio is a good example. So, but how they're created, ethically, how are they created? By what means are they created? Again, I'm not saying just because we can do something, we shouldn't do it. I'm asking the question, just because we can do it, we need to ask, should we be doing it? So some vaccines are done ethically and humanely, and there's no detriment to anybody. No one had to die in order to create it. And then you've got aborted fetuses being used for the creation of vaccines. Those two things don't go together, and therefore I believe that people should be able to decide for themselves whether or not they want to have a particular vaccine. So, for me, that means that just because something is available doesn't mean that it must be enforced and put into place in such a way that you are restricted if you don't comply. Now, I want to draw a parallel on the other side, where I was talking about the ability to abort babies. And we've got technology today where those who can't have children can use IVF. Now, my thoughts on that do come along as being quite harsh, I think. Again, I think just because we have IVF technology doesn't mean that we necessarily should be playing the part of, creating something that, or someone that's not going to be naturally created by the natural process of things. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of people who have used IVF or would consider using it in the future if it didn't work out the way they'd like it to. But on balance, I want to make the point that there are many who can't have children naturally, while there are many who can and are aborting them. And those two things do not stack up for me. If we're meant to have children, it'll happen. If we're not meant to, it won't, right? Just because we've got a technology that allows us to do something does not necessarily mean we should do it. Now, I know that's going to come across as very sharp for some people. I know that it's going to offend a lot of people. But the point is not to offend. The point is to ask the question, just because we can do something, should we do it? Now, I'm aware that adoption laws and all those sorts of things are crazy difficult for people. But imagine if someone who, it just happened to be that they were pregnant and they didn't want to have the baby, look after the baby, or didn't have the means to. What if it was easier for them to go through that process anyway, but the baby was adopted to parents who weren't able to have their children? What if that was easier, that process? Then we wouldn't have such an issue where people who couldn't have kids weren't still able to have a child because they would go and adopt. So we've got, on one side, we've got people trying to have children and using technology in that way to have children that they would not normally necessarily be able to have, while children who are 100% viable fetuses are being destroyed before birth, and in some cases almost right up to when they'd normally be about to be born. To me, that imbalance is absolutely ridiculous. Okay, and then you've got aborted fetuses being used for vaccine trials, fetus parts for sale online, or being used in. We're in a pretty sick world where, because we have such power at our disposal, we make decisions for our own good at the detriment of other people, and we never stop to necessarily ask the question, just because I can, should I? Now, it's a matter of opinion that I hold, but I've given good reason, I believe, for the opinions that I hold. And I assume, I'm guessing, and I'm also aware to some degree that there are people out there that would refute what I'm saying, but simply throw in the proviso of, I'm able to, it's my right to, who are you to tell me I'm not allowed to? And laws are allowing it, so they're correct. By law, they're allowed to. But again, if we look at some laws that are in place, we can question the ethics of those too. So we need to be careful about right and wrong, and we need to understand that right and wrong don't always match up to law. And my encouragement is we need to be thinking through these things. That's the point I'm trying to make here. Just because they can lock down the border, just because they can have the power to lock down a city and everything like that, and have a grab for emergency powers and all those sorts of things, does not necessarily mean that they need to do it. Okay? They can, should they? And under what circumstances? So it's a difficult thing sometimes, I find, to share these types of things directly with people, especially when they're affected by them, and I'm not directly affected by them, and they say, well, how would you know? You've never been in that position. But I want to just make a clear point that in many respects, I have made decisions at the point of needing to make them based on what I believed I would do in those cases, because I'd already thought through the issues. So, for example, I will put this out there so you all understand. If, after marriage, my wife and I are unable to have children naturally, I will not seek to take IVF. That's the money where the mouth is statement, because I don't believe in it. I don't believe that just because I can or have the opportunity to do something doesn't mean that I should. Now, for some, their desire to have what they want overarched whether they should. And something that I want to look into also is a connection between IVF and the creation of new life, or the helping along to create new life, the connection between that and birth defects, or different medical issues that children might have as a result, possibly, of something that just went a little wrong with the process, and whether there's a increased incidence of those types of things in babies that were created using IVF versus just natural conception. I'm interested to look into that, but I haven't looked into that enough to make a full comment. But I do suspect that there could be some correlation to that. And that again would prove to vindicate my thinking on this to some degree. Again, I did warn that this might be quite a sharp topic, but when we're talking about vaccines being created by using aborted fetuses, and at the same time we're looking at creating new life artificially to some degree, or at least making it happen when it otherwise wouldn't happen, we've got to ask we've got to ask ourselves the questions. Should we be doing it just because we can? To what end? And by what means are we doing these things? But as difficult as that is, we've got to be careful. We've got to be so careful to be thinking these things through, and not getting carried away by what we want and trying to get it when we want it. We have such power to have what we want when we want it, especially if we're financially stable and secure. We live in such a safe country. I mean, what we're seeing right now with all this stuff and lockdowns and that, unprecedented stuff. But up until this point, we've been a very sheltered nation, and we've not had to deal with too much, other than just working hard. For some people, we've got to work hard and to make ends meet. But environment didn't necessarily affect everybody. We didn't have civil unrest. Everything's been pretty safe. So it's a bit of a shock to the system at this time. And we've had the power and the means to just live life and do what we'd like, sometimes without a whole lot of consequence. But we've got to ask ourselves these questions. They're valid questions. They will help to put us in good stead for later. So going back to what I was saying before, my encouragement to anyone who might be the person who says, well, just because you've never been in this position and I have, or just because we've never been in that position, how can we, or how can you judge what you would do in that situation? It's a dangerous idea to put forward that type of thing, because preemptive decisions, or having a good idea about what we would do in a certain circumstance before it occurs, actually is very helpful. We can't foresee every type of bad thing that can come along, but just as training for first aid and training in safety and all those types of things, we are prepared as much as we can be by doing those trainings and by knowing how to do something, even though we've never been in that position yet. When it does come along, we just snap into action. I've only had to do CPR one time in my life, for real. And that was for my mum. Now, unfortunately, the result of that did not bring about the conclusion that we would have liked. And unfortunately, it wouldn't have mattered. It wasn't going to be a positive result. A blood clot to the lung. I mean, unbeknownst to me, I'm not a doctor. If she was in the hospital at the time, maybe something could have been done, but CPR was not going to win that battle. But I snapped into action because of my training. I'd done rather extensive training in CPR and first aid for my work. And so because of that training, because of that knowledge, because of that, I didn't have to think, oh, what comes next? I just snapped into action. So applying that same idea to what we would do in a circumstance that has not happened to us yet, but we've seen other people have to handle something like that, and we decide that's actually maybe not the best way to have handled that. In that situation, I'm not going to do that. And I have the reasoning as to why I have that idea. Then when it comes along, I'm not caught off guard because no, I decided. Now, that doesn't mean that our ideas can't be a little fluid. Perhaps we've got to adjust our thinking based on just exactly what it looks like. But we have somewhere to move from because we've already considered those issues. So as I said, I didn't actually say this yet, but as I will say, abortion is never going to be an option for me under any circumstance. Quote, under any circumstance, abortion will never be a consideration for me, and neither will IVF. And I'm firm on those things because I have the strong conviction and the strong understanding as to just how the imbalance looks. I don't accept either of them. I'd be open to adoption if it came to that. So that's really it. Just wanted to share that with you. If you like this video, please leave a like. If you would like to subscribe, please do that. Share this video with people that you think might benefit from hearing this stuff, but just warn them that it is potentially offensive for some people because they're easily offended and don't really want to look at things from, a different perspective too much. They just want to be happy in their little bubble of happiness. But yeah, please like the video, subscribe to my channel, and share the video. Thank you once again for being with me. I know it's a little sharp, but that's my thoughts on all of that. Just because we can do something does not necessarily mean that we should do it. Thank you for joining me. As always, God bless you, and we'll see you in the next videos. Bye for now.